Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Jank Tank, episode number 43. My name is Timothy, Zach, and Nino. I'm going to be your pack one, pick one today, and joining me, I have two wonderful wheels with me. I've got Teld, as usual. Welcome back, Teld. Good to have you, as always. And, well, we got another episode without Chris here, but I want to assure the audience. First off, Chris is still part of the still part of the Jank Tank. He was here for the mainline set review for Tarkir Dragonstorm, but none of us really recognized that our next recording day was going to be on Easter, and we woke up yesterday and it was like, oh, tomorrow's Easter. I don't think we can Chris said, I don't think I can record. I'm going to be with family or something like that. So we kind of flubbed that one, and Chris had to sit this one out yet again. But we managed to pull in somebody, as you've seen with the title episode. We're going to be talking about 3-color cards, and Teld had a great idea of, who better to bring in as a guest than one of our kind of resident 3-color drafters, if you will. And we've got Persian on the line with us. Persian being one of the admin in the Jank Diver Gaming Discord. And Persian, you're coming like right off the tails of Mop being on the a recent episode as well. So we've got like the whole admin team kind of like rotating in and out here. But welcome to the show, Persian. I think this is your first time on the Jank Tank.
Yeah, it is. Thanks for having me. It's really good to be on the show.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get you a lot of notoriety here for sure with the 40, 50 views that this episode gets across the board. But, and Teld, how are you doing, Teld?
Happy Easter, everybody. I've been kind of obsessed about BG3 for the last week. I was playing through some other games and then started another playthrough of it just casually, and that casually slowly devolved into I'm playing it all day when I'm not at work.
Did something new released for Baldur's Gate recently or something?
Yeah, they did the new subclass patch, but honestly, it's been like a year since I last played the game, or 9 months since I last played the game or whatever, and just felt like it was time for another playthrough. I've got some friends who are doing it, and we've been talking about it a lot.
Speaking of things that friends are doing, happy 420 to those of you out there as well, but wait, wasn't the studio like fired or something? How are they still releasing content? Or maybe I'm misunderstanding what happened to the.
No, I think they just said they weren't going to produce any DLC or work on like a Baldur's Gate 4. I think they said that the next project they work on will be something of their own. I don't think it had any like sort of falling out with WotC. I think it was just they wanted to move on after they finished up with the game.
Okay. Yeah, I still have not touched Baldur's Gate 3. I was my goal was to wait for it to go on sale, but it's never dropped in price, so I haven't touched it at all. And I feel like I'm way past the hype on it at this point.
I'll say like it is one of the best games I've ever played. It's in my top like 5 or so. Probably could make an argument for like top 3. It's one of the handful of games along with like Elden Ring of modern games that I would be perfectly willing to pay full price again for.
Mm-hmm. Persian, are you a Baldur's Gate gamer?
I am not. I've been spending my time jamming Tarkir Dragonstorm. I mean, like this is like my dream set, right? Like I'm the multicolor gamer, and this is like the set for me, right? So, I've been jamming games in Tarkir Dragonstorm, trying to do the globe thing. Except everyone's playing aggro now.
Yeah, save that thought for the sign off, the farewell, because I wanted to chat with you guys about Tarkir Dragonstorm at the end, but not the topic today. So before we let Persian introduce himself, I do want to get all the housekeeping stuff out of the way here. So remember, as always, the best way to support Jank Diver Gaming and the Jank Tank podcast is to join the Discord server. Come draft with us, give us your feedback. It's a great place to hang out with like-minded individuals and talk about Cube, Retail Limited, case in point, Tarkir Dragonstorm, really hot right now. Come talk about all things Magic. You can find links to the Discord server wherever you're listening to this podcast. We host tons of scheduled drafts throughout the week, including the Peasant Cube on Saturday nights, the mainline Jank Diver Cube on Sunday nights, F&M style drafts on Fridays where our players vote on a cube to play. And what happened last Friday? It was we had 12 people, and somehow the 2 cubes that got voted were the 100 Ornithopters cube for a pot of 6 and the dragon cube for a pot of 6. It was just nonsense. It was just two different pods of just nonsense drafting. But yeah, there's some fun stuff that can happen on those F&M days. And we've got various guest cubes created by members of our server throughout the week, so there's always plenty to do. Find our socials, Twitter at JankDiverGaming, YouTube.com/JankDiverGaming, and you can find Teld streaming on Twitch.tv/TeldTalks, TELD Talks. Persian, are you like on the internet anywhere, or are you just like, if people want to find you, they can just come to the Discord?
Yeah, just come to the Discord. I'm here.
Okay, yeah. Well, I guess with that, who are you? What's your deal, man? What are you doing here? You've been a great admin addition to the Jank Diver Gaming team, but who are you? Introduce yourself. Take a couple minutes to familiarize the people with who you are.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, I've been playing Magic since 2007. I actually joined around Lorwyn Block. Like my first ever standard deck was Fairies. So that's kind of where I fell in love with tempo decks. But I actually joined on the tail end of Fairies when they kind of crushed all our dreams by printing Volcanic Fallout, which for those of you who don't know is a pyroclasm effect that's uncounterable. And then the deck that kind of took over was 5-color Cruel Ultimatum Control, and that sort of became my favorite deck of all time. And so, I think you could almost say that's like my villain origin story of how I became this 5-color maniac.
That explains a lot, actually.
Yes, yeah. This was a deck that played triple blue cards alongside Jund cards, alongside blue-white hybrid cards, and of course Cruel Ultimatum. So it was basically everything you would not want to put in a cube.
This was before my time, but my understanding was like Vivid Lands and Reflecting Pools let you just do whatever you wanted.
Yep, Vivid Lands and Reflecting Pool let you cast anything that you wanted, exactly.
I don't know if I like that. I don't know if I like that or not. That was like that's at least a good 5+ years before I started playing Magic, but I've heard rumblings of the 5-color Lorwyn decks.
Yeah, that was a couple of years before I started playing too, but that's kind of wild. The colors of mana are just a social construct, the format.
Well, I mean, that's the reason you're here is we knew we were going to talk about 3-color cards as kind of a follow-up to Tarkir Dragonstorm coming out, which actually had like really pushed 3-color cards for once, unlike Strange Necropena. And Teld, once we knew Chris wasn't going to be on the episode, Teld had a great idea. Why don't we bring in Persian? And all he does is draft 4 or 5-color decks in the Jank Diver cube, at least Timeless cube. Seems like you've always got like Minsk and Boo in a blue-black deck or something like that. So, you've kind of got a reputation at this point of being the person in the pod who is going to not only like draft multiple colors, whether it's right or wrong, but also like derail the draft for numerous other people. So, again, welcome, and hopefully you'll have some pretty good insights on drafting 3+ colors in cube here. I think we're going to focus more on like 3-color cards and the purpose of 3-color cards rather than like any sort of strategy about drafting a 3-color deck or anything. But once again, welcome, and hopefully you got some good insights for us. Hopefully you can give us the tea on how to actually do this and how to evaluate a 3-color card.
Oh, hopefully I can bring some insight. Thanks.
Yeah, or you could just be like, yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't. Like, we could just talk about all these cards, and you're like, yeah, I wouldn't draft that. One thing I want to address up front, a couple things related to some comments that we got. So we've got a regular commenter on YouTube. I don't know exactly how to pronounce the name, but I'll try. It's Sosukulele, I think, or something like that. They left a comment. Actually, they leave a comment on a lot of the YouTube videos, but we did the episode recently on the first 8 picks of a draft where obviously it would have been really nice to see the the draft packs somewhere, and I had a link to them where you can go to a Google Drive and actually look at the packs. I don't know if people did that or not, but yeah, they commented that it would have been really cool if the draft packs were in the actual YouTube version of the video, and that's a comment that I get a lot about the YouTube videos. In fact, it's probably the number one piece of feedback I get about the YouTube video version of this podcast is that people want to see card images, and I will let people know up front, as much as I want to do that and would love to do that, I just do not have the time to add that extra layer to editing, especially for something like a set review, like a 3-hour long thing. I am very, very scrapped for time these days, so adding anything extra to the editing process is just like really hard for me to do. So I hear people on that piece of feedback. I would love to get to a point where I can actually start doing that. I used to do it for my old mini podcast, Scattered Thoughts, but right now it's not a priority. At some point in the future, though, hey, we make a Patreon, you want to contribute to that and put a little change in the pocket, then maybe I can find the time, but right now it is not in the cards for me to be able to add anything extra to those YouTube videos, which is unfortunate. I do believe, the comments are right. They would definitely help. I've always imagined people aren't sitting there watching the video, but I guess people have it like on in the background or on their TV while doing other things. And, they would like the visual. So I hear people on the feedback, and maybe in the near future I can find a way to actually start incorporating that, but it won't be like right away.
With 6 sets coming out per year, Tim is pretty stressed in the design team there. It's a lot of work on their shoulders.
Yes, because the joke being I work at WotC, right? I work at WotC. I have no time, right? I'm too busy designing Magic the Gathering cards. Second thing I wanted to address here, another comment from YouTube, and this is going to lead into our single card discussion. Unless you guys had another card you just really, really, really wanted to talk about. I see that Persian's got a card he wants to bring up here, but I wanted to address a comment that we got on a card that we recently talked about for Tarkir Dragonstorm, which was Zergo Stormrender. And I want to point out that this is not a card we've actually been able to test yet because it's not on Arena yet. It's not the main set Zergo, it's the Commander Zergo, which isn't coming to Arena until they release their alchemy patch for Tarkir. So we don't have access to the card yet. It was something we were really excited about, and we got a comment kind of, questioning, probing a little bit, respectfully probing, why are you guys so high on this? So I wanted to talk about it a little bit more. I also wanted to get Persian's opinion on the card because it's not in the cube yet, so Persian hasn't obviously drafted it yet. I don't know if you've even seen this card yet, but Zergo Stormrender is red, white, black for a 3/3 with Mobilize 1, and when a creature token you control leaves the battlefield, you draw a card if it was attacking, and your opponents lose a life if it wasn't attacking. So in any other case other than an attacking token, your opponent will lose a life. Now, Teld, Chris, and I were fairly excited about this as a Mardu space signal for a token-type strategy, which touches all 3 colors that tend to do the token making. And we thought this was a neat little signal for kind of combining different parts of the monocolored sections into one kind of Mardu token deck. I will read this comment here, which comes from Idonius on YouTube, which I've already responded to this person, but I wanted to get your guys' take here. So the comment says, you guys seem really high on Zergo Stormrender, but isn't he basically just Garna Bloodfist of Keld, which is an old Dominaria United card? Basically had a very similar effect, but Garna costs 1 black, red, red, so 4 mana for a 4/3. It's 1 mana less, but you need white, and you even mentioned that he might be as good or better if delayed after turn 3. Sure, Zergo has Mobilize, but Garna triggers on all your creatures, not just tokens. 1 more power doesn't matter a ton, but it's something. And cherry on top, Garna doesn't take up your Mardu slot, quote-unquote, so you can still run Siegebreaker, Mardu Siegebreaker. Teld, first off, what are your thoughts on it? Did you have anything about Zergo Stormrender, since you were actually one of the people who talked about it with us? Anything that you wanted to add that maybe addresses, why this card would be a better use of a cube slot than, say, Garna? And then Persian, obviously, I want to hear your take on this card as well.
Yeah, I've got a few thoughts. I haven't had a chance to play this card either. I've been a bit busy with work stuff. I'm planning on picking up the Mardu Precon and giving it a shot for, it has a Grand Crescendo in it. Anyways, beyond that, I want to say that I think this is a really insightful comment. I kind of forgot that a card like Garna did exist when we were talking about Zergo. But I do think the differences are pretty noticeable, mostly with Garna. First of all, the 4 mana thing versus 3 of different pips. I'm not sure exactly which of those would normally be more effective, I guess. The thing that sticks out to me with Garna is it takes red, and I actually think red is probably in most cases the splash color off of Zergo. I think most of the time this card's going to be in a more black heavy red black deck or in a black white deck that is splashing for it. So I think the 2 red pips on Garna is really the deal breaker here. More than anything, I think Zergo being self-enabling with the Mobilize is obviously pretty decent. There's a lot of little synergies for that, even beyond its own internal synergy, right? We have a number of Blood Artist effects. We have cards like Enduring Innocence and Adeline and things like that benefit from the fact that it makes its own token. So I do like that Garna triggers off of any card, obviously, but I think the being able to come along with its own buddy for synergies and then also not being as red committal is a pretty big deal here. I think that red pip would be the biggest thing I think that they have different going on. I think that's a deal breaker for me on Garna, but I do think they make a fair point here.
You hit the nail on the head. I was thinking the exact same thing. The red pip is a big deal here. If you're an Orzhov deck that's trying to do the sacrifice thing, you can't easily splash for this thing. It's a really big deal.
Mm-hmm. So they made a good point, like 3 colors, 3 different pips means that sometimes you won't be able to cast that card on turn 3, so like theoretically you might end up having to cast Zergo Stormrender on the same turn where you would be casting Garna anyway, right? And then Garna's ability is kind of better than Zergo's in some situations because it does apply to all creatures. The thing is, though, like if you cast Zergo on turn 4 or 5, often you can double spell, right? Like you can still, especially in a deck like a Mardu deck that's probably going to bias towards a really low curve, like Zergo on 4 alongside a 1-drop is just better than Garna on its own. So I think 3 versus 4 is kind of like, the big thing for me here, even if it is 3 different pips. Like mana's good, like mana's pretty good these days, so being able to cast a Mardu 3-drop on 3 isn't inconceivable. And then on, even if you have to like load it off until turn 4, being able to cast Zergo plus like your Bloodstained Champion or something in the same turn seems strong enough to me. So it is worth noting as well that Zergo triggers on tokens leaving the battlefield, whereas Garna triggers on tokens dying or something like that, or creatures dying. So there is a little bit of upside to Zergo's ability if your opponent has like stupid Kamano faces Kakazan in play, which just hoses graveyards. I hate that line of text on that card, but that I don't know that really figures into the evaluation or not. But Persian, what do you think of this card? Because right now we're on Mardu Siegebreaker as a placeholder for Stormrender since it's not on the client yet. But we haven't played with this card. It hasn't gotten any testing for us yet. What do you think of this card just in a vacuum? Like, would you see Zergo Stormrender and be tempted to do a Mardu token deck? Or is this the type of 3-color card where you're like, nah, I don't think that's for me?
No, I think this is absolutely worth testing. I mean, I look at this card and I see, first of all, it's like a self-contained engine, right? When you're comparing it to Garna, like if I play this on an empty board, like this just is, when this attacks, draw a card, basically. Whereas like Garna does not have that. So that's like a really big deal for me. And then also, I kind of feel like a card like this is nice because it signals a theme, right, for the drafters, right? Like it tells you that Mardu wants to do this particular thing.
Persian read the show notes. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, that's the hope, right? That's the hope, is that people see a card like this and they're like, oh, Mardu can do a token strategy, right? Like, we'll talk more about that, obviously, later on in the show, but hopefully the 3-color cards, like, are actually unifying the different colors in certain ways rather than just being, like, generic 3-color cards that don't really tell you to do something. But we'll chat more about that later in the episode.
I think this is also just to go back to this for a second too, is like Mardu obviously is a centered in white clan, and I think most of your best token effects are centered in white. Like you got the Rabble Master style effects in red, and there's a few effects floating around in black like Lord Skitter, but I think most of the best token producing effects are in white, and so having a card with a white pip on it to signal that, I think is good for like cube directions, cube signposting.
Yeah, like Elspeth Stormslayer, that's a token generator, right?
Yeah. It's definitely a very powerful token synergy card.
Yeah, that's definitely
very synergism.
Definitely all that card does.
That card should have probably been 3 colors, but anyway. You also had a note here about Slimefoot and Squee. Did you want to mention that card real quick?
Yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to my favorite card in our cube right now. I think that, we'll talk about this later on, I think, when we talk about, like, when would you want to splash for these sorts of things. I think that this is a perfect example of a card that, for me, like, I'm not going to randomly go out of my way to splash for this because it's so much better when I play it on curve. And I actually can kind of see that with the Zergo Stormrender as well. Like if you can play that on curve, it's going to be much better than playing it in the late game. So to me, that they kind of looked similar, and so they reminded me of each other, right? They're both these like 3-drops that are making a 1/1. Of course, I think Slimefoot's probably better. But yeah, I think the big difference being that Slimefoot's in green, and I think that this will come up in the discussion later as well. But for me, when I'm thinking about playing 3-color cards in cube, whether or not I'm base green makes a huge difference in my evaluation.
Yeah. I'm going to read Slimefoot and Squee real quick, actually, because it is a card that a lot of people might not know about. This was like one of those throw-in legends for Dominaria, or no, this was March of the Machine, right? That it was just like
Mom Commander.
Yeah, it's not actually in the main set. People might have skipped over it. So Slimefoot and Squee is Jund mana, black, red, green, or Riveteers mana if you're a freak. It's a 3 mana 3/3. legendary fungus goblin. And it says, whenever Slimefoot and Squee enters the battlefield or attacks, create a 1/1 green Saproling. And then it has a graveyard ability. For 1 black, red, green, you can sacrifice a Saproling you control on the battlefield to return Slimefoot and Squee and up to 1 other target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, which you can only do as a sorcery. So as long as you keep a Saproling in play, it can always reanimate itself, plus bring another creature from your graveyard back to the battlefield, which is incredibly strong. Kind of forces your opponent to not just kill Squee and Slimefoot and Squee, but also like use removal on the stupid Saproling tokens, which always feels terrible. Same kind of jib as Zergo Stormrender here, like you said, 3 mana, 3/3 in 3 different colors. Has, utility as the game goes on. Very killable, but has a place in a certain style of deck. Jund is pretty popular with our people. So, yeah, I do like bringing that up as a comparison, and we will mention Slimefoot and Squee a little bit more later on. But this is a card to just kind of like earmark as hey, if you're in a similar power level cube as ours and you haven't considered this card, like maybe go back and check it out because it is very powerful.
Yeah, I had two comments came up with Slimefoot and Squee recently in a draft, and one of them was, do we actually think this card is good / worth splashing? And I think the answer to that is like, yeah, obviously. But the other question was, isn't this the kind of card that we normally dislike because it's so recursive and so sticky and just kind of obnoxious and difficult to deal with? And that is also, yeah, kind of. But I think you kind of need these multicolor cards to be doing something. We're going to talk about this, but they need to be doing something particularly powerful. And I think without that graveyard recursion effect, Slimefoot and Squee gets a lot worse. I will say though, when this card hits the table, it's a very, very scary card. It's far scarier than it reads, I think, even. You just realize how difficult it is sometimes to get all the parts of this card off the table.
Yeah, because it makes a 1/1 when it attacks, so it's getting value on attacks, but if you kill it, you're also going to get value off of it being in the graveyard, and especially with things like Oliphant and Khazad-dûm, Troll of Khazad-dûm, just being like just the simplest creatures. Maybe we should just dedicate a whole episode to the stupid Lord of the Rings land cyclers and how they just pull everything together for every deck. But yeah, Slimefoot and Squee is very powerful, and I think as far as that question, like, do we think this is good enough for the cube? Yes, absolutely. I don't think this signals a Jund theme or anything, but Jund's kind of quote-unquote theme is just playing powerful cards, so it fits in there, right? Like it does its job for the Jund style deck. So let's touch back on that one later on in the episode and actually get into what we're talking about here. And this is the role of 3-color or 4-color, 5-color cards. We'll touch on those as well in a traditional 2-color cube. So a couple caveats here. We're not talking about people who have like a gold cube or something like that where every card is 2-color, 3-color and stuff like that. We're talking about a traditional cube that has like your 2-color pairs. You've got your Gruul deck doing this thing. You've got your Dimir deck doing this thing. And you want to, evaluate a couple 3-color cards. Like that's kind of our purpose here. Where do they fit? How do you fit them in the cube as far as cube equity goes? Like what is the power level that you need to look for on a 3-color card? That sort of thing. And second caveat, I'm not talking about any of the like not really 3-color cards, like split cards, like where push and pull. I'm sorry, that's not a 3-color card. Like that's not part of the conversation here. So actual cards that cost 3 colors of mana to cast is what we're talking about. And I guess just to lead into the conversation, like open-ended question here for both of you guys. What are you looking for in a 3-color card when it comes to something like the Jank Diver Gaming Cube? Obviously, Vintage Cube can get away with a lot more with its, mana package and, the power level of cards there. So I don't really want to focus on that power level, but at our power level, like the historic card pool, what are you looking for in 3-color cards?
Well, I guess I can start. I'm looking for a card that's more powerful than the same types of cards at its mana cost. I'm looking for a card that is, when I'm drafting, I can rely on it to potentially wheel. As a drafter, like, if I'm doing the multicolor nonsense, I'm looking for cards that people are not going to take, but they're more powerful than cards that should wheel if they weren't 3 colors. So that's really what I'm looking for, is something that's powerful for its mana value, more powerful than you would typically get in the 2-color options, and hopefully it can wheel during the draft.
That's a good point about wheeling. That's not something I had written out in the show notes here, but yeah, that's something. In fact, Zergo Stormrender is a great example of a card that probably will wheel if you end up in the Mardu space, right?
Yeah, this is the We've talked about this a little bit with even some of the 2-color cards where the difficult to cast pips on something like Koglin Yadaro, or we're not on it anymore, but I guess actually Kroxa is a good example. Like Kroxa is very difficult to just incidentally escape, and Koglin Yadaro is very difficult to incidentally have the mana for in your deck. And so these cards kind of make it easier to get them late, and 3 and 4 color cards kind of do the same thing. I do generally agree they need to be more powerful, because if you're stretching your mana, you're inherently increasing the variance of your deck, particularly with aggressive cards. And so I think they need to do something particularly powerful. But I think for me, I tend to go into the design brain sort of thing of it, and I really want cards that signal something, ideally. And it doesn't have to explicitly be some sort of build around signaling. Like, I think Raffine is really interesting, because after we added that, we saw a huge uptick in the amount of just Esper Shard tempo decks that people are playing. So I know Harold recently trophied with a blue-black deck, and if he had 5 white sources, probably would have stuck a Raffine deck in there, because it's basically blue-black aggro. People have been messing around with like Sheltered by Ghosts in blue-white shells, just trying to kill people dead. So I think cards like that sometimes cause people to retroactively look at the card pool and kind of find the lane that was there, even though this card wasn't added for that particular reason. And even with something like Nicol Bolas or Slimefoot and Squee that are just more generically good stuff cards, I think they very much signal what those cards are doing. Like Grixis is almost always a control deck, so Nicol Bolas is a guaranteed 2-for-1 if your opponent kills it, and it's also a win condition if they don't. Slimefoot and Squee kind of embodies that Jund, I'm going to grind you out 1-2-for-1 at a time kind of deal. And so I think that's one of the things that I'm really looking for. That's why I've really liked a card like, for example, Felithar, Dawn of the Abzan, even though I haven't had a chance to play it and it's possible it's not powerful enough. I really like that it's signaling something about what those 3 colors might do when they're all paired together. And I think that's more, for me, more important than specifically the power level, is like, does this card do the thing, but also like show what your deck could look like inside that shard?
Yeah, I think those are all good points, and we're actually going to use Felithar here as an example in a moment, but I think there's 2 checkboxes, right? The 3-color cards need to either check off this is a just generically powerful card checkbox, like to Persian's point, it needs to at least be better than the cards at the same mana value in like the monocolored sections, right? Nicol Bolas the Ravager, which is the 4-mana Bolas that makes your opponent discard a card. It's 4/4 flyer. Like, that checks off that box, right? Because I think Nicol Bolas is probably better on average than, say, Rekindling Phoenix in red, or Kefnet in blue, or Rankle in black, right? Like, it's not doing anything super thematic. Like, yes, it does kind of embody, like, Grixis control to some degree, but it's not like, oh, Nicol Bolas is telling you exactly what Grixis colors are supposed to do. It's just generically powerful, and more powerful than the stuff that you don't have to stretch your mana for. Like, you should be rewarded for stretching your mana if your cube designer is asking you to stretch your mana for something. And I think Bolas checks off that box, and Bolas, I think, is the I want to say it's been in our cube since the very beginning. It's kind of like the 3-color card that we've always held on to. And I always go back and forth about like what its role in our cube is, but people love the card and it sees lots of play. So
yeah, it was the only 3-color card that was in the cube when I first got on.
There might be something to be said for the fact that it's also just a famous character in the lore, right? I don't know, that's might not be the reason you put it in there, but I it's nice to have a Nicol Bolas somewhere in the cube.
Yeah, it was part of a really good standard era too, where a lot of people have fond memories of when that card, the time period roughly when that card was in standard. Mm-hmm. If I remember right, that was around the time that we were in the Return to Ravnica block that was really powerful and fun.
Yeah, what was Bolas? M19, I think, was when they did the dragons. And hey, if we can get uncommon Palladium Ors, can we get uncommon Nicol Bolas the Ravager? Like, come on, people. That's a good point, actually. Very similar. Jace the Mind Sculptor, right, was a card that we put in our cube when we got it. It sucked. I think it actually just actively sucked, but we held on to it for a while because it's Jace the Mind Sculptor, right? Like, people want to play with the card Jace, and this traditional card, and Bolas kind of has that same energy, right? It's like, it's Nicol Bolas. Like, people want to play with Nicol Bolas. So that's a good point. I don't, that would like never sway me in a draft pick, but maybe there's like some Vorthos drafter out there who's just like, I want to play with Nicol Bolas tonight, which you don't get with something like it's Fang Keeper's familiar, right? It doesn't have that same kind of like resonance to it or whatever. But checkbox number 1, the card just needs to be generically powerful enough. And then checkbox number 2 is what Teld was talking about. It needs to signal a theme. It needs to have a purpose in the cube. It needs to like justify its existence in the 3-color decks. Like if it's doing something just wildly different than what that 3-color pair normally does when it comes together, then the question is like, A, why is it in the cube? And B, why would people even draft it? So I don't think a card needs to check off both those boxes. It needs to be either more powerful than the monocolored options or signal a theme. But obviously, if you can get a powerful card that signals a theme and check both boxes, you've like completely nailed a 3-color card, right? Which doesn't come along very often. We actually don't even get 3-color sets very often as it stands. So like how often are you really going to get a 3-color card that ties everything together for a color trio? I think that's, Zergo Stormrender is an example of a card that does that. Even if it ends up not being powerful enough and we cut it from the cube, it's something that is interesting and checks off the boxes we're looking for in a 3-color card. So signal and a theme. I think this is kind of like my big point here. And I know Chris, if Chris was on the episode, this is kind of the part that he would really want to emphasize is he wants the 3-color cards and we want the 3-color cards in our Jank Diver Gaming Cube to do something thematic. Like obviously Nicol Bolas is just powerful enough, but for a card to crack, like a 3-color card to crack the Jank Diver Gaming Cube at this point, it needs to kind of tell you what the themes are doing. And I think a fantastic example that Teld already mentioned is Felithar, Dawn of the Abzan. Teld, do you want to remind people what this card does and kind of like rehash a little bit of the conversation that we had on the review episode?
Yeah, so Felithar is Abzan mana. That's white, black, green for a 3/3 legendary human warrior with trample. And when it enters or attacks, you may sacrifice a non-land permanent. And when you do, you put a +1 counter on each creature you control. So it's kind of like a 3-mana Ridgescale Tusker of sorts. And it really ties a bunch of different themes together. Mostly that white is a color that cares very deeply about going wide, and black is something that has a lot of easily disposable recursive bodies. And on top of that, green has a +1/+1 counter theme inside of it. Not to mention, as we've moved on, we're slowly starting to see more of the we've talked a lot about in the Peasant episodes about how there's more just game objects floating around that just incidentally are there. And Felithar takes advantage of that by being able to sacrifice non-creatures to be able to do stuff. So, for example, you could do something like Grimbauble, and you've now converted your Grimbauble into a bunch of +1 counters. And when you combine that with white and white's ability to go wide, and some of the black cards that do that the same, in theory, Felithar is the kind of card that could signal and be worth stretching your mana for. Now, I don't know if it is. It remains to be seen. Haven't had a chance to play the card. If I remember right, it doesn't have the best data in 17 lands for the format, so maybe it's not going to get there, though sometimes it's hard to translate 17 land data into this environment because we just have a lot of times cards like this that rely on a specific thing, like tokens, those are going to be much more thematically pushed in a cube environment. And so, sometimes the data tracks, sometimes it doesn't. In any case, I think this is a really cool card, and I'm looking forward to getting a chance to playing it at some point. I think the only problem I have with a card like this is that I think that most of our 3-color cards are going to have this problem, and that I can see this card being worth splashing in white-green. I can see it being worth it in white-black, but green-black is kind of a nebulous identity, and I think without a heavy white theme, I would not want to put this card in my deck.
Mm-hmm. 2 out of 3 is not bad, though, right, as far as overlapping guilds. Like, that's enough of an incentive.
Meatloaf did call that out a long time ago.
Oh, man, I don't... What is the reference? I don't get the Meatloaf reference here.
2 out of 3 ain't bad. I want you, I need you, but I'm never ever gonna love you.
No, I'm sorry, I'm not picking up the Meatloaf reference today. Persian, do you get are you on the Meatloaf reference here?
No, I don't get the reference at all.
We're uncultured swine.
Have you guys ever heard the song 2 out of 3 ain't bad?
I don't think so. I mean, maybe if I have, I don't know. If that's the name of the song, I definitely don't recognize the lyric.
Don't be sad, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. That's all.
No. Congratulations, we just got copyright struck by Meatloaf's...
Is Teld singing a common occurrence on the podcast?
No, that actually might have been a first or a second or something. It was kind of impressive. I thought Meatloaf was in the room with me there for a second.
Yeah, I know. My singing voice is truly something of...
Do Zoomers even know who Meatloaf is? Like, I highly doubt it. Persian. Okay, so Felithar. So my gut reaction is that Felithar is the type of 3-color card that you wouldn't bite on. Is that true? Like, could you speak to this card real quick? Like, what do you see when you look at a card like Felithar? Imagine you're opening Jank Everett game in Cube Draft right now. Felithar is in pack 1, and you're seeing some other like Abzan Spectrum cards in the same pack that could wheel, or vice versa. Like, what are your thoughts on Felithar here?
Yeah, I think this card is powerful, but I think your inkling is right. This is not a card that would draw me, and I think to contrast this with Slimefoot and Squee, this is not one of the generically powerful multicolor cards. This is one of the like synergy cards, right? Yes. And so, when I look at this, like it's going to require a lot of work from me. And usually when I'm drafting these multicolor piles, I just want to have the good stuff cards in my deck. I want powerful cards that are going to wheel. That being said, I mean, this card is very powerful. I'm sure I'm going to try to draft around it at some point. I think it definitely gives you a reason to splash if you are in green, white, or black, white. But then also, to that note, I think that it's a card you want to be playing on curve, right?
Yeah, and obviously, like, 3-drop, 3-color cards, like we said with Zergo, like, you have to anticipate that some amount of time you're playing them on turn 4 or 5, which I think Felithar, like, kind of still works on turn 4 or 5. Like, it's not quite aggro slanted. It gives you time to set up a board more, and then you can anthem more things, so it's not the worst thing to not play on turn 3. But it does raise an interesting question. So very similar to just, like, a complete build around, like a mono-colored build around. I want to use the Dreadhorde Arcanist as an example, right? That's the 2-mana creature that when it attacks, it can flash back a 1-mana spell from your graveyard, unless you pump its power or whatever. That's the type of build-around card that you don't see in decks that often, right? Because if you first pick it, then you have to go, like, really, really deep to make it work. But if you see it in, like, pack 3, you might not have a deck set up to use it, so it just doesn't get drafted in pack 3. And I do see a card like Felithar and a lot of these 3-color cards kind of occupying that same space where people aren't necessarily wanting to start off 3 colors a lot of the time. So, like, are they going to first pick Felithar? Probably not, unless they're just trying to, like, be ambitious or try something new for that draft. But then if pack 3, you get to Felithar, like, pack 3, pick 2 or something like that. Like, your deck, even if you're, like, white-black, your deck might not be set up to use Felithar. So there's a question of, like, when are you expecting your drafters to take a card like this? Or are you expecting them to just take a complete rider on Abzan from the beginning and, draft around Felithar, assuming they're going to get it at some point in the draft? And that's not a question I have a good answer for. But, yeah, Persian's absolutely right. So Felithar does not check off the Nicol Bolas box of this is generically powerful, just make it work and it's going to do its thing. But it does check off the this signals a theme box, and therefore I think it is a good example of a 3-color card that justifies its spot in a cube. Even if, like, fast forward 3-4 months from now, Felithar is not even in our cube anymore, I think it is serving a role. It has a justification for being in the cube, and it might not pan out, but it does kind of unify a lot of things. It answers an essential question that a 3-color card needs to answer, which is, why should I add this 3rd color to my 2-color deck? And I believe it does answer the question, like, why would I add black to my green-white deck? Well, my green-white deck goes wide. It cares about Anthem in the board, and black provides the sack fodder, right? So it answers the question, why add black to my Selesnya deck? And I think the 3-color cards need to answer that question to some degree, at least for, like, 1 or 2 guild pairings, right? I don't, to Teld's point, I don't think this really answers the question, why would I add white to my green-black deck? But the question, why am I drafting green-black in the first place, is something we still haven't really answered.
Yeah, I think one of the advantages of these more synergistic cards, though, is given that we open the entire cube every draft, I think you can expect to wheel this, right? Or you can expect to get this late, rather. Maybe not wheel it. If you're drafting this, whenever it shows up, if you're drafting Abzan, you probably are safe to assume nobody else is drafting Abzan or doesn't want this card because it is very narrow. So I think there's some advantage there, because something like Nicol Bolas or some of the cards we're going to get to later, I don't think you can ever expect to see a super late Nicol Bolas unless just nobody's in blue or blue-black at the table, which is pretty rare, because I think people will take riders on that card pretty aggressively. Now, I think the biggest issue Felithar is going to have, if I had to point one, is I actually think all the cards that you conceivably want for Felithar to make it really good are just some of the best cards in the cube. They're just a lot of the go wide token cards are just very good cards in general.
Yeah. That's fair. There is kind of like an issue a little bit with the like I'm gonna build towards Felithar and just assume I get it in pack 3 is that doesn't really work for like a new drafter who doesn't know Felithar's actually in the cube, right? But hey, maybe they might be surprised. Maybe they just are drafting Abzan or whatever. And which big word of advice to people: don't go into a cube and start drafting Abzan. Just don't do that unless you have a real strong reason to do that. But yeah, they might just like stumble across Felithar. But yeah, if you are a regular drafter, Felithar's in the cube, I bet you could just start drafting Abzan from pack 1, go all the way through pack 2 and just assume you're going to get Felithar at some point, which if you don't, congrats on your O3 or whatever. But hopefully at that point you at least have like a solid 2-color deck that's just like touching the 3rd color. You didn't just go like off the deep end on all 3 colors.
Yeah, and I think at some point you have to have, and I don't want to dive deep into this because we've had discussions about mana before, but the way that we currently construct our mana bases makes it pretty easy to start speculating on cards like this early into the draft in many cases, right? Your fetch plus typed land mana bases make it much easier to start setting up your potential flyers on these sort of cards.
Yeah. Bad example of a 3-color slot, and I hate to sully the name of our Lord and Savior, the Rhinos, but I just wanted to use Siege Rhino, and I guess Skirmish Rhino. It's debatable which of these is even the better card. I wanted to use these as an example of like a bad use of a 3-color slot in a cube like ours, because do we need to read Siege Rhino? Again, Zoomers don't know Meatloaf. Do Zoomers know Siege Rhino? I don't know. Siege Rhino is 1 white, black, green for a 4/5 trample, and when it enters, your opponent loses 3 life and gains 3 life, the scourge of Standard 10 years ago. And then obviously Skirmish Rhino is the like little baby Siege Rhino that we got in Tarkir Dragonstorm, which just costs white, black, green for a 3/4 trample that drains 2 life instead of 3. I don't know if you guys disagree, but I don't think Siege Rhino is powerful enough as just a standalone card, especially with the 3-color tax. Maybe if this was a monocolored black card, it would be worth playing, or a monocolored green card. But as a 3-color card that asks you to like warp your mana base around it and, dedicate a number of picks to fix it and things like that, I don't think it's there on like the Nicol Bolas power level scale. And then it does nothing thematic at all. It tells you nothing about the colors white, black, or green in the context of a cube. So I just don't see why you would use a 3-color slot on this. Siege Rhino might be better in a lot of decks than Felithar, but I think it's just an example of a bad use of a quote-unquote 3-color slot or gold slot in a cube, because it just doesn't justify itself on power level for its cost, and it doesn't signal anything about the color trio.
Also, with the singleton nature of cube, you lose the most powerful line of text on Siege Rhino, which is when Siege Rhino enters the battlefield, search your library for Siege Rhino and put it on top of your library. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, I think that Siege Rhino has been power crept, at this point. It's just not more. It's not more powerful than other 4-drops, right? Like we were talking about with Nicol Bolas. Maybe we'll see the day when Nicol Bolas is no longer powerful enough. But I don't think it's worth having a slot in your cube in the 3-color slot for something like a Siege Rhino or a Skirmish Rhino for that exact reason.
Yeah, I mean, Vampire Sovereign, the 5-mana uncommon, or I think it's even been booted down to common in one set, but 5-mana 3/4 flyer that drains 3 when it enters. There's a conversation about whether that card is better than Siege Rhino on average as a 5-mana monocolored card rather than a 4-mana 3-color card, which I think Rhino still wins out in that debate, but at least the conversation is there. Vampire Sovereign was the Siege Rhino with the Peasant Cube for a while. But yeah, these cards just don't get there. Like, I would be very confused. Like, imagine you're a new drafter and you sit down and you open a pack that has Skirmish Rhino in it, and you're just like, am I supposed, like, you didn't study the cube or anything. It's like, is this what Abzan is doing? Like, well, and
Abzan
then
life gain, let's go.
I guess like you have to kind of like do some guesswork there if you don't know the cube already about why this card is here, and I don't think it gets there on just pure power level. It's like a slightly more powerful vampire spawn that you could play in a monocolored deck. So yeah, all love to the Rhinos or whatever, but they do not get there as far as 3-color cards in a cube environment. But you know what does? Loot the freaking Pathmaker, or Pathfinder. So raw power 3-color cards are a different category. Siege Rhino doesn't get there on raw power, but cards like Loot the Pathfinder do. We've mentioned, I've been using Nicol Bolas as kind of like the checkbox card for this category, but Loot's probably even a better one because it does kind of do the blue-green thing, and then you add red to your deck and you get this like super powerful card. So I guess let's read Loot the Pathfinder, and then we can have a conversation about like why this is in our cube, how it justifies itself, why it's just a raw power card. But this is the one from Ether Drift with the terrible art. Loot the Pathfinder, 2 green, blue, red, so teamer card. It's a 2/4 with double strike, vigilance, and haste, and then it has the 3 exhaust abilities, which you can activate only once each. The green one lets you tap Loot to make 3 mana. The blue one lets you draw 3 cards, and the red one bolts something for 3 damage. So what are we seeing with Loot? Okay, so here's the thing, right? Felithar, we put this in the cube. I don't anticipate anyone will ever first pick Felithar and build around it, but I think all 3 of us probably have first picked a Loot, right?
Oh yeah, this card is very powerful. I mean, it's a 5-for-1.
He swapped out the good art. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, yes, it's a 5-for-1. But it also, like, it slots into blue-green decks perfectly, right? Like, the blue-green decks are just ramp decks, and then it does answer that question. Why would I add red? Well, I get to play Loot the Pathfinder, and I get to use, like, the Bolt ability on this card. It's just generically strong, while also slotting in, like, not perfectly, but it does slot into, like, what one of the 2-color decks is already doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think this also frequently fits into green-red as well. Yeah. I mean, both the green color pairs can, I think, pretty easily do this. And I actually think Loot is one of those cards that's so powerful that if you're just playing an Izzet deck and you've got, a couple of fetches, like, I could see the argument, right? You kind of want to get it to a 6-drop, but it does hit pretty hard. It threatens to, if you untap with it, it's just a game-ending threat. Goes face with the bolt function. I haven't seen it in a base blue-red deck, but like I'm not saying I would be shocked if I did.
Yeah, I gotta say, I think this touches on one of the things I was thinking about earlier, which is like I really want to be base green for sometimes when I'm looking at these 3-color cards for that exact reason. Like if I'm Simic or Gruul, I think I'm much more likely to splash for a card like this. I mean, Loot I think is so powerful anyway, you would otherwise, but green, one of the things that I think lets you splash so easily is you just have these 2-drops like Paradise Druid or Llanowar Loam Speaker that just, they ramp you, but that they inherently fix for all colors, and so it almost makes it more free to splash for something like Loot when you're base green.
Yeah, you get the 1-2 punch of a lot of these cards are 4, 5, 6 mana, and so ramping into them makes them obviously better, but then also you're fixing the colors along the way with your various Birds of Paradise style effects. So yeah, I agree. I think these cards are always easier to splash, especially like Loot specifically being you're already in green, and so since you're playing green as like with dorks, you're probably already in the teamer space generally, because most people, green-black's not exactly a popular destination. People have drafted it and done fine with it, but it's probably the least popular of our colors. And then green-white usually has a more proactive game plan. It's less frequently a ramp deck and more frequently like kind of a go wide or like a mid-range deck.
Mm-hmm. Did you see Florine's deck from last night? That was like a white-based Elspeth deck, and he's like, I saw Loot the Pathfinder, and I went all in on it.
I did not see that, but that does not surprise me. I also associate this card with Florine. I think that they've got this card in like every single one of their decks.
Yeah, and they just keep getting it somehow because nobody else has taken it from them. I don't draft R-Cube very often. I've probably drafted it twice in like the last 3 or 4 months, but I definitely first picked Loot when I saw it the one time that I drafted. Persian, you had a point here about a comparison to like the Scarab God and other like really powerful 2-color cards. Did you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I had a point here that I when I look at Loot, it's a card that's so powerful, and I don't care if I draw it late. If I'm in Simic or if I'm in Gruul, I will splash for this. And a card that's also in our cube that has a similar space in my mind is something like the Scarab God that I will go out of my way to splash for it. So if I'm already in blue-white, and black doesn't even necessarily have to be open, and I see a late Scarab God, I will try to take it and splash it just on power level. And I think that it's because this is the kind of card that's fine not to play on curve. Like we talked earlier about, you know, some of those 3-color cards that are much better to play on curve. You want them early because they have attack triggers, for example, right? But this is the kind of card that I don't care if I play it on curve. If I draw it in the late game, it's still going to be fantastic. And, you know, so I look at this card, and to me, it reminded me a little bit of the Scarab God in the same way. I would go out of my way to splash for it. So that was mainly what I wanted to say with that.
Yeah, and for these blue 3-color cards, in fact, sometimes you don't want to play them on curve, so you can like try to hold up a Spell Pierce or something. The same loot, and in fact, is a great example because loot's really just a 6-drop. Like you don't really want to jam the card on 5 and expose it to removal. You want to be able to activate at least one of the abilities right away. So it's kind of like a secret 6-drop, but yeah. You know, the teamer card that I was really excited about from Tarkir Dragonstorm was Ureni, the Song Unending, I think the name of the card is. It's the 8-mana 10/10 flyer that deals damage equal to
protection from everything.
Yeah, I really like that card as far as like a teamer signal of like, here's your dumb big ramp target. And I would really love another like justified power level ramp target in like green based decks for our cube. But that card also, if that card didn't have protection from black and white, I would be way more excited about like the prospect of it in the cube. But they slap double protection from 2 removal based colors on it, and it is just a 10/10 that wipes your opponent's board, so it's probably like pushing it as far as you know, our power level goes. But loot is also very, very powerful. And the saga, too, the Teamer saga that we just got, there's a lot of actually pretty powerful Teamer stuff. But you got to be careful when you're in green, right? Because you're ramping into these things. You're getting these things out, like, presumably a lot faster than the other 3-color decks are getting out their payoffs or whatever.
Yeah, somehow as ridiculous of a card as it is, loot somehow feels the least egregious of, like, the 4 options of teamer bangers that you could be running.
Yeah, they really went overboard with the teamer cards in the Tarkir Dragonstorm. Great for limited, I guess. Ureni's just really fun card and really wraps that whole format together. That's sarcasm. Cube equity. So Persian, cube equity is something we talk about on the podcast a lot. Actually, I think maybe I talk about it a little bit too much, and everybody else is like, whatever. Cube equity being the idea that, like, exactly what it sounds like. Every time you add a card to a cube, like a 360 card cube, especially like a tight cube, it is taking the place of like every other card that you could be playing. So there's a cost to add in a card to a cube, and there's a bigger cost to add in a 3-color card to a cube than there is add in a monocolor card or something like that. So just wanted to have a really brief conversation on like the cube equity related to 3-color cards, especially since they are cards that won't always make their way into decks like on any given night. So one question here is from the cube design perspective, and I know Persian, you don't design the cube with us, so maybe Teld can speak to this a little bit more, but like for other cube designers out there, like how do you actually get the 3-color cards into your cube? Like, are you cutting monocolored cards? Are you cutting 2-color cards? Are you cutting colorless cards? Like, where does the cube equity come from for you to be able to play these 3-color cards in the first place?
Yeah, so for us specifically, I think a lot of that room comes from the fact that there are like 3 playable artifacts or colorless cards on the arena client. So our colorless section consists of 4 cards. And yeah, there's a lot of free real estate there that we get to use on multicolored stuff, especially the growing number of 3-color cards. Because while Chris says he doesn't want a 3-color card in every single color, that is a lie. He definitely does.
We don't need one in every single color is the sentiment there, right?
We don't need one, but I'm sure if we get a good 3-color card for every color, he'd be happy. But we also don't do things like, we don't have very restrictive multicolor, like 2-color sections, right? So generally there's 3 to 4 in any given section, but at times we've had, 2 Golgari cards and 5 Azorius gold cards because we just really liked what was going on in that section at the time. So we're not super tight on that. We've gotten a little more balanced about it over time, but even now we don't really care if our gold sections are all perfectly even. They just we put the cards in that we like and we roll with it from there. I think there's room that we could probably trim some space from either the lands or from the actual spells we have in the colored sections. It kind of just depends on what your cube building philosophy is, and then also what cards you have access to. I think the closer you get to something like Vintage Cube or Legacy Cube, where there's a lot of really powerful colorless cards, or when you get access to all the Commander paper cards where you just have a huge influx of playable, powerful cards, I think that does change the dynamic a little bit, and you probably have to be a little more picky. But in our environment, I mean, we now don't really have a card quality power level concern with the arena card pool anymore, but there's still not a lot of density in terms of replacement level effects or colorless cards. So, we can kind of pick and choose and use some of those spots for gold cards.
Mm-hmm. And I don't prescribe to the belief that you have to have one of each 3-color card. Or in fact, we added was it Lion Weight, the Sultai uncommon, to the Peasant cube, and one of the responses was like, "Oh, what teamer card are you going to add to the cube?" And it's like, we're not. That's actually not true. We did add the Dragon Claw Strike or whatever, but that's like kind of not really a teamer card. But like we're not going out of our way to flesh out the other 3-color cards just because we want one of each thing. It's okay. It's okay for like gold sections to be slightly, skewed. I will say there was a point where we noticed, I think when Nicol Bolas and Slimefoot and Squee were the only 3-color cards in the cube, you did notice a strain on the red-black lands specifically because those 2 3-color cards overlapped in black-red. So, like, the Rakdos lands would be getting chewed up by different players outside of, like, actual Rakdos players. But I think that just meant, like, the Rakdos drafter had to recognize, like, oh, I need to take my lands when I see them. So I don't think that's necessarily, like, a huge deal. You don't have to, like, restructure your mana base to make 3 colors work. You don't have to, like, suddenly add a bunch of triomes. Because what you don't want, unless you do want this, but I think what you generally don't want as a cube designer is for your players to just want, like, for the best thing to possibly do in your cube to be 5-color soup, right?
Yeah, I think this is the danger of having too many of the, especially 3-color cards, just be power cards, is you're kind of encouraging people to do that. I think that's why you want to have some of them at least be synergy cards that kind of signal a theme or require some sort of hoop to jump through. I don't think we're there, but I do think it is more common right now to see lots of colors in decks still. I think you a lot of times still see that, less than maybe when we had the fetch triome mana base, but I think as long as fetch lands are part of the format, you're going to have some amount of just multicolor soup in every draft.
Especially if I'm there. I wonder if I'm not there, then it might be a little different.
Yeah, drafts with you are noticeably different than drafts without you. Like, I don't say that insultingly. Like, they are. Like, people are like, oh, Persian's not here, I might actually get mana fixing or whatever. I did want to ask you, like, do you think, because I know Persian, you'll like snap off fetch lands early. You're one of those people. Teld, I think, is right there with you as far as like taking fetches early and just feeling out the rest of the draft. Do you think like a good multicolored deck is actually the best thing to be doing in the Jank Diver Gaming Cube? Do you think there are 2-color decks, like streamlined decks, that are better than that, or like do you just do it because you enjoy it? Like, do you think that's an actual strategy that you would like recommend to like a first-time drafters? Like, these multicolored decks are just really, really powerful. You should lean towards those.
Oh, I definitely would not recommend it to a new drafter. It should always come with one of those big disclaimers like, don't try this at home, kids, But I do it because it's fun. I think that being more disciplined drafter is probably the way to go if you want to win. But, we don't always draft just to win, right? We're drafting to have fun, too. So...
Yeah, I think one of the problems that arises is that I don't actually think drafting multicolor fetch piles is necessarily is really the best thing to be doing. And in fact, we've had a bit of a red tear as of recent. And I think it's more due to the lack of dedicated aggro drafters in our draft pods. It just happens to be that our regular drafters are all a bunch of people who like drafting 3 and 4 color mid-range decks. We like drafting control decks. We like doing the big brain stuff, and aggro is very good in the cube. Like, there was a tear there where aggro was like, there was like 4 aggro trophies in a row. And when we have people who are willing to draft that and who are pretty happy to play it, and they were all people who are not necessarily regulars, not, their names I recognize, but they're not every week drafters. And I think if people would be more willing to do that, you would have better results. But I think the problem is, for a lot of our players, myself included, is when you play aggro, it is sort of like a Jesus take the wheel kind of moment where you're just, you're kind of, you feel like you lose a lot of agency because as the game goes on, you don't have a lot of decisions late game. All of your decisions are kind of compressed into the first 5 or 6 turns of the game very frequently. And a lot of players don't like that. They like feeling like they've got outs as the game goes on. They like feeling like that Doomblade they just drew gives them a chance to draw their Lorien revealed. And that gives them a chance to draw their, 4-drop or whatever. And so I think it's just a personal preference thing that our drafters have going on. If they just don't like drafting aggro, and they probably should draft aggro more than they do, but we can't really expect them to, because we're drafting here to have fun. And if you don't enjoy playing aggro, you're not going to have a good time.
Yeah, if we were designing our cube for like tournament style play where there was money on the line, I'm willing to bet like almost none of the 3-color cards would be there. Like maybe even Nicol Bolas and Slimefoot wouldn't even be in the cube, but they do kind of inspire people to build different decks. And, sometimes somebody on a Friday night just wants to like hang out and do something goofy, and they see Slimefoot and Squee, and they're like, all right, I'll start off 3 colors. I'll make this work or whatever. I did want to move away from 3-color cards for a couple moments to talk about the big boys, the 4 and 5-color cards, which I think people can get a little bit carried away with in some environments. But the 4-color cards rarely do synergistic things, right? They're just there on power level. Like the Omnaths of the world are just the Nicol Bolases of the world. They're just doing something really, really powerful. So when you draft a 4-color card, you're not really signing up to do anything super strategic. You're just signing up to do like a multicolor pile that's just going to try to have the most powerful cards in the world. And one thing I will say to cube designers specifically is, as fun as it is for some people to play with like super powerful 4 or 5-color cards, we have seen multiple times in the past in the Jank Diver game and cube that extremely powerful 5-color cards can actually be a detriment to your draft environment as a whole. And I think the 2 cards that like highlighted this for me were the Prismatic Bridge, which was the back half of Essica. The Prismatic Bridge is a Wooburg enchantment that just free rolls a creature or planeswalker from your deck into play every single turn for free. Super busted. If it goes on like 2 or 3 turns, you're just getting free stuff in the battlefield. And then Field of the Dead, which obviously is a colorless land, but really incentivizes you to just take a bunch of mana fix and dual lands, so you end up in a 5-color deck most of the time anyway. The problem with these cards is that they are extremely powerful incentives. They're the type of cards that can win a game on their own if they, hit the battlefield. But they make you, whoever has those cards just needs to vacuum up all of the mana fixin'. Just, it doesn't even matter. Like, Prismatic Bridge player, Field of the Dead player, they just want every single dual land that they can get. And that makes it really hard for the streamlined, like low curve aggro decks to actually get the fixin' that they need to operate on a regular basis. And we were seeing the stupid Field of the Dead players, the Field of the Dead is stupid, not the players. They were just like indiscriminately taking every single dual land they could, and like the red-white lands would disappear from the draft pod or whatever. And the red-white aggro player who was, trying to draft responsibly and trying to take their lands never saw them. And it was just really, really rough for pods to have like half of their mana fixin' dedicated to one deck that didn't even care what the mana fixin' was. They were just trying to play some super powerful 5-color card. So I think there's a place for 4 and 5-color cards in cube, but I just wouldn't overload on them, and I wouldn't make them so generically powerful that like they're just one of the best things you can do in your cube. So what do we have? We have Omnath, and that's it, I believe, as far as like multicolor, like true multicolor cards go. We used to have Golos, but Golos has definitely dropped off in power level. So it's really just Omnath in our cube. And it's not doing anything synergistic. It's just a powerful card, but I don't think it actually like oversteps the boundaries. So I don't know what you guys' thoughts on Omnath are these days. Like, it's another one that I'm like back and forth on. Like, is it supposed to be here? But
I don't even know the last time there was an Omnath trophy. I mean, people will sometimes play it, but even then, people don't play it like they used to, where they would just find ways to force it into their deck. But like, it's been at least 5 months since a deck with Omnath Trophy. Now, I want to say I'm going to keep scrolling here for quite a while before I get to one with Omnath in it. So, I mean, and granted, 3-0s are not all that matter, right? Like, I know Fuller had Omnath in his 2-1 deck from the other night, the Elspeth / Loot deck. My point here is that I don't think it's stepping over any bounds, because people just aren't putting in winning decks, at least. They aren't putting it in the decks that are going all the distance. And if it's a powerful enough card, it will show up, right? That's the thing, is that even though it's a small sample size, if you have good enough cards in your environment, like cards like Quintorius or something like that, show up, right? Cards like Hazaret show up, even if it's a relatively, even if you only have the one deck that 3-0s, these cards do show up, and we aren't really seeing. I had to go all the way back to September of last year when Persian won with a. Oh no, this was July of last year. Excuse me, when Persian trophied with an Omnath deck. That's the last 3-0 Omnath deck.
Was that when we had Triomes?
Probably,
yeah. I'm sure the Triomes were there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Omnath kind of lingers in our cube because people do sit down on a lazy day and sometimes want to just do the thing, quote unquote, do the thing, which is like draft all the colors and the most powerful cards, and Omnath is kind of the card that lets them do it. But Omnath is the type of card that either goes first pick or last pick, right? Like, there's very little in between. You either start off with Omnath and you're quote unquote doing the thing, or Omnath doesn't get drafted. And I guess the question is like, is Omnath worth the cube slot? Is it worth the cube equity? Is it supposed to be in our cube? Like, I'm not sure I have a firm answer on Omnath specifically, but it has kind of lingered for quite a while.
I will say I think another problem with a card like Omnath is Omnath was really good conceivably into aggressive decks, right? Because you go up a card, you gain some life, they have to use a removal spell on it. It's really good if your opponent is on this kind of smaller game plan. But in our environment specifically, I'm not even convinced your 4-color Omnath deck is favored to out green the other green decks, right? Unless you're just... Obviously, if you could slip it in there, sure, but these more consistent green decks are already doing such powerful over-the-top things that I'm not convinced that Omnath actually adds that much to the game plan. Like, I mean, it is obviously a good card. It's banned in multiple formats, I think, right? But our green decks are just... I don't know. If you try to out mid-range green decks, you're just gonna get bodied. That's one of the problems that a lot of the non-aggro decks, non-tempo decks have been facing lately. Is that our green fives are good. They're really good.
Yeah. Persian, you're a little bit of an Omnath gamer every now and then, though, right?
I am. I will say though, I'm kind of in the camp that you guys are talking about, where I'm not so sure on Omnath anymore. I'm not gonna first pick an Omnath because it's such a heavy commitment that it needs to be there on power level, and I don't know if it necessarily is anymore. I made a little note here in the show notes. I'd like to make a case for Niv Mizzet Reborn, because to me that's one of the few 5-color cards that's not there for power level. If you did include it, it actually is to me more of a synergy or thematic card. So if you were to like have one slot in a cube for a 4 or 5 color card, I like the idea of something like a Niv Mizzet Reborn, because it takes up the one slot, but then it gives you a strong reason to try and build around it. And you don't really need to skew the rest of the cube to make it work. You naturally will have other color pair cards in the cube. So I don't know. Maybe I'm trying to make a case for that. I do have a kind of a love for that card. It's a little bit of a pet card of mine.
Niv Mizzet Reborn is the Wooburg 6/6 flyer that when it enters, you look at the top 10 cards and you get one card of each like color pair or each guild, right?
Yes.
I actually have this as a commander deck of a Super Friends deck of all things.
Your Hellq deck.
Yeah, I don't play it very often for good reasons. I will say I have a gripe against Niv Mizzet, and it's the same gripe that I have against Field of the Dead. And it is that it is really fun for somebody to draft a Niv Mizzet deck and like try to put together the different pieces and balance the guilds and stuff like that. It really screws over the rest of the table, though, is in my opinion. It just like if I'm the blue-white tempo deck and I see a Spell Queller and I'm like pretty certain that nobody else is going to take Spell Queller, I just don't want there to be a card in the cube that like somebody else is going to be like, oh, I'm going to take Spell Queller because it's a 2-color card for my Niv Mizzet deck or whatever. Like, I feel like if you draft responsibly towards the 2-color decks, you should, a fairly large clip of the time get rewarded with your gold cards. Like, that's kind of the whole purpose of them being there. And I don't like the idea of the Niv Mizzet deck just indiscriminately taking good gold cards because of the way that card is designed. So like I think Niv Mizzet Reborn would be really fun for the person playing it and can be kind of like a pain in the ass for the people who aren't playing it because their gold cards are just going to get vacuumed up by the Niv Mizzet player, which isn't true of like every gold. Like a Niv Mizzet deck does not necessarily want like Undead Sprinter or something like that, right? So the Rakdos deck isn't like, oh, my Undead Sprinter went to the Niv Mizzet deck, but you can see that with like the good efficient removal spells or, the top end like finishers like Teferi, Hero of Dominaria and stuff like that. They will get scooped up by a Niv Mizzet player. Very similar to the way that they would get scooped up by like the Prismatic Bridge player or something like that. So I actually don't love the idea of Niv Mizzet in a cube like ours specifically. I think people should get rewarded with their 2-color cards when they identify the lane is open, but I do think the card is really sweet. Like, if it was in the cube, I would play it. I would take it. I would try to make it work. I just think it could be miserable for other people in the same pods.
As you explain your reasoning, I 100% agree with you. I mean, like, from a design perspective for the cube, I definitely see what you're saying. Like, I'm also sort of learning that I'm like the a-hole at the table, apparently, for the way that I draft. But no, I mean, it makes sense.
What we didn't tell you is this is actually your intervention.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, but I mean, there's something to be said about the fun of the card. I'm struggling to even think of 5-color cards that I think are like fun for an environment without being like broken or miserable. And there aren't a lot of cards that that check off that box. So like, I think the multicolor stuff really should kind of stick to the 3-color spheres when possible. I think cubes are not healthy when 5-color is the best thing to be doing. So I don't know if you guys would push back on that, but if 5-color is already better than 2-color, and then also 5-color needs to take the lands from the 2-color decks, I think that's bad news for the health of a cube in the long term. But transitioning real quick, kind of like the last kind of overarching point here is I wanted to touch on Peasant Cube. I didn't want to make this like a Peasant Cube episode necessarily, but I did want to point out that when you're talking about 3-color cards, the kind of bar for entry is even higher for a 3-color card in a Peasant environment because of how synergistic and thematic the 2-color decks tend to be in Peasant cubes. I think we found that like adding colors to your deck in Peasant Cube does not necessarily lead to a more powerful deck. Sometimes it can, but like just default into like, oh, I'm going to take all the fix-in and all the gold cards kind of leads to a mess in Peasant Cube, because then you're combining your Rakdos sacrifice cards with your, Golgari Gravebreak cards, and it's just like, what are you doing? You're not really getting paid off to add extra colors to your deck here, so...
Yeah, you got to be a little more deliberate about it. And I actually think that's part of why we added Lion Weight and why we're not adding other cards is like Sultai is actually a deck in our cube, in our Peasant Cube. It's a deck people regularly end up in. And so it sort of signals that deck that people already know exists, but it helps newer drafters. It's kind of a signal to them that, hey, maybe this is something you could do.
Yeah, exactly. Lion Weight was almost the perfect like Sultai Peasant card I could even think of. Like, it just does exactly what that color trio does when you combine those colors together, regardless of this card existing, right? Whereas Ligrella the Magpie, a card we don't play anymore, but was like the first 3-color card we tried out, that was a really good fit at the time because our blue-white decks were, dedicated blink decks, and Ligrella the Magpie asked the question, like, why would I add green to my blue-white blink deck? And the answer is the blue-white blink decks don't actually win the game. They just sit there and like cycle through things forever and ever and ever, and adding green to that deck actually kills your opponent at some point. Plus, like, you get bigger creatures off of the Ligrella cycles and things like that. So I felt that was a justified 3-color card in our specific Peasant environment at the time, even though I don't think it would fit quite well. Actually, it fit pretty poorly now that blue-white is like doing artifact stuff. And then Sonic Shrieker is the other 3-color card from Tarkir that we're trying out. That's the Mardu one, the 2 red, white, black 4/4 flyer that shocks something on ETB, and if you hit your opponent, they discard a card. That one's just pure power level. Like, this is just the Nicol Bolas at uncommon, I guess, is what this card is. Wait a second. Wait, this is Nicol Bolas at uncommon.
Yep.
Oh, wait, we really did get it. Hold on a second. Yeah, it costs 1 additional mana, but yeah, holy shit. But yeah, you normally shock a creature. This is just a power level spec right now. Like, it does kind of nothing that our Mardu Spectrum decks want to do. Those are like, twiddly reanimator sacrifice kind of decks, and Sonic Shrieker is just like this kind of haymaker creature, but it is there on power level that we decided to play it. Don't actually expect to play it for very long, but it is the type of card that I think people will take sometimes and be like, okay, like, let's make this work in my Mardu deck.
I will say I ran into this card into somebody playing I think it was like a red-white aggro deck the other day, and it was like, oh, this is a problem. I was well prepared for your diddly aggro strategy. The giant 4/4 that just discarded one of the last 2 cards in my hand. It's that's a bit of a problem.
Yeah, the card's very strong. I am a little worried about its position in the cube as like, just, it doesn't signal a theme at all, but I think, again, going back to...
Almost a little anti-synergistic, actually.
It really is. But it does check off that one box of, like, powerful, whereas Lion Weight, I think, is the example of a card that checks off both boxes. It is a powerful card and it signals like the whole, Sultai spectrum of pulling cards out of your graveyard for various benefits and, playing to the late game and graveyard synergies and self-mill and all that. So Lion Weight is kind of like the ideal gold card when it comes to cube design. So really love that card, in case I haven't made that very clear on the podcast yet. So that's really all I have. I know I feel like I've been rambling a little bit for the last half hour or so, but do you guys have any like thoughts to like wrap up 3-color here, or any of the 3-color cards that are like currently in the Jank Diver Gaming Cube that you guys wanted to talk about?
Well, we did not talk about Fangkeeper's Familiar, and I'll just mention that I like this card in theory. I like the more modern Magic appropriate Mystic Snake, though I would be much higher on this card if it was a Bant card, because I think that would be much more in line with kind of the way our colors play out. I mostly just like the black-green thing. Like, I think this is a blue-black card most of the time, or a blue-green card that is asking you, like, again, the black-green 3-color cards, like, there's a question of, like, why are you in black-green in the first place? I think if it was Bant, I'd be much more excited about it, because it would fit more elegantly into what all the colors are doing. And I know we briefly mentioned it, but I did want to give Chris the shout that he added Graphene on a whim to the cube. We kind of just took a shot on it, and I know you and I were not particularly fond of the card, and it is really just shown up like every week, and people go out of their way to put it in their deck, and it's like got people playing these Esper tempo decks, and you know what? It's like let the people have their fun. That's one that panned out really well.
It has created decks that wouldn't be here if Rafine wasn't here. I did want to ask Persian, what happened with Fangkeeper's Familiar the other day?
I can't remember. I will say, I gotta say, it's not the type of card that I will typically go out of my way to splash for, and maybe it won't stay in the cube for long. We'll see. But to me, it doesn't check the 2 major boxes that we've been talking about, right? I don't know if it gets there on power level, and I don't know if it signals a theme. But it's a good card. If I'm doing my multicolor nonsense, like, this will make my deck. But yeah, it's definitely not a card that I'm like gonna go out of my way to splash for. So something to consider. It
is a placeholder here. We are gonna play Taval the Balanced Scale when it comes to Arena. That's the it's a 4-mana 4/4 flyer. When a card leaves your graveyard, you make a 2/2, and then I think when it attacks, you can pull a land out of your graveyard and put it on the battlefield, something like that. That is a Sultai themed style card that I know Chris and I in particular are excited to play. It's kind of in the same sphere or camp as Felithar, where it might not actually be that good. It might not pan out. It might not really like entice drafters to move into it. But that is the card that we want to bring in, and we decided, or I guess I kind of like decided on my own to just slot in a random Sultai card that felt good enough for the time being until we actually get Taval. So Fangkeeper's Familiar here is not sticking around once Taval comes around, and Taval might not even stick around. So we might go back to just not having a Sultai card at some point unless Taval really impresses. But yeah, to your point, Fangkeeper's Familiar is a 3-color card that really doesn't check off either of the boxes, and is kind of just here as a placeholder. Yeah. So I tune into a draft from your perspective, like mid-draft. It might have been like match 2 or 3, and you were getting like horribly mana screwed, but people mentioned something about you like pivoting to put Fangkeeper's Familiar in your deck or something. I don't know. I didn't watch the draft.
It turned out badly. That's why I'm trying to use this hindsight to warn people not to do that, because that draft did not go well. I did want to also say one last thing about, when you were talking about cube equity and symmetry, I wanted to say I agree that you don't need to play an equal number of 3-color cards, One of the things that I got to give you guys credit for is you're not afraid to, like, break cycles of cards, right? So, for example, you have all but the white Lord of the Rings Land Cycler. Or, for example, you guys play Copperline Gorge, but you don't play Seaside Citadel, the blue-white one. And that's because blue-white's not trying to, play that kind of a game plan. And so I just wanted to give you guys credit. I really like it when cube designers are okay with breaking up symmetry in that way. And, I think that it's totally fine to not have an equal number of 3-color cards.
Yeah, I think the reverse of that can get you in trouble, though, where for 3-color cards in particular, I don't think you need to have one of each color, right? Like, if you add Slimefoot and Squee, you don't have to, like, go out of your way to find some sort of Naya card if it just doesn't, like, pop up or it doesn't fit. But I do think you can get in trouble by having, like, too many of a particular 3-color card and, like, none of the others. Like, if we had 3 Grixis cards and no other 3-color cards, like the draft definitely starts to skew towards like the overlapping Grixis colors and things like that. So I think that is something that can get out of hand, but I mean, we've never been in a position where that was a problem in the first place, and it's something we wouldn't really do. Like, we wouldn't go out of our way to add another Abzan card right now with our already having an Abzan card. So I guess that's more of a cube design thing, is try not to skew things too heavily in favor of like one guild or one 3-color pair. But that's usually not a problem. But also to Persian's point, you don't need to fill out every single section. It does not have to be symmetrical. I know for the Peasant Cube, I'm a little bit of a freak when it comes to like having equal number of cards in all the gold sections, but I will recognize that is a kind of a fragment of old cube design that people just latch onto too much, and it's okay to break symmetry. Even in the monocolored sections, it's okay to have like slightly different numbers in your monocolored sections, but unless I guess Vintage Cube used to be in a position where like you just wouldn't play green-white cards at all because they all sucked, but I don't think they're really doing that anymore.
That's not just a problem there. That's a Magic problem as a whole.
Yeah,
is that green-white cards tend to be like, they tend to either just not be nearly good enough, or they're just occasionally they'll be like game warping. Yeah, I think now like Vintage Cube has some Commander green-white cards that just like draw 15 cards or something, but
yeah, that sounds about right. Okay, so yeah, cool discussion on 3-color cards here. I'll go ahead and close things out. As usual, remember you can find us on Twitter at JankDiverGaming. You can find us on YouTube at youtube.com/JankDiverGaming, which I think that's like totally outdated, and that's not how they do the URL anymore, but you get the point. Just go to YouTube and type in JankDiverGaming, where you can watch the rest of these Jank Tank episodes. And you can find Teld streaming on twitch.tv/TELD Talks. If you want to come talk to Persian a little bit more, come join the Discord and at him like 15 times a day. I'm sure he'll respond. I'm sure he'll appreciate that. Basically an honorary Chivo Charlie, if you will. And we'll be back. We've got quite a ways to go until the Final Fantasy set, so we get to do some actual like cube content episodes. And I'm assuming Chris will be back with us at that point, unless some other holiday comes up two weeks from now. But hopefully we get Chris back in the rotation here, though I do appreciate all the guests who have been coming in. And Persian, thanks for taking the time to talk about some 3-color stuff and share some of your insights with us.
Yeah, thank you. No, I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. This was a good experience, and I hope that this also will get more people to draft multicolor piles, even though that's not what you guys want, right? No.
We put the 3-color cards in here, so we want people to play the 3-color cards. But yeah, that's going to go ahead and do it. Thanks to the listener, as always, for hanging out with us, and we will catch you next time. Yeah, as a farewell, I guess since the three of us are all here, and I know Persian's been playing a decent amount of Tarkir Dragonstorm, I guess I'll just probe your guys' thoughts on the limited format, where you're at with it, where you think it lands in relation to some of the all-timers and stuff like that. And I know you guys probably have like slightly different opinions, so I think that works out here as a farewell. Yeah, Persian, let's start with your thoughts. Like, where are you at on Tarkir Dragonstorm? You mentioned at the beginning that you were kind of loving the format a little bit.
I like it. I like it because I still feel like I'm learning things. I think maybe it's because I'm behind. I haven't been watching all the content creators, and I haven't been playing it like as much as some other people, which is kind of bad in some ways, because like I'm drafting the Globe deck, and I think everyone on the client has moved on and they're playing aggro now, and it's really really bad for me. But the fact that like something like the Globe deck maybe wasn't discovered in the first like 2 or 3 days of the format, I think that's really cool. I think when there's a format that can you can still discover things like that late into the process, I think that's really cool.
Yeah, the Globe deck, I've been beaten up on the Globe decks lately. I've kind of shifted towards the Mardu spectrum, and when people play Globe on turn 3, I just do a little fist pump and hit them for like 6 or whatever.
Yeah, you're one of the ones I'm losing to right now because I'm a week behind everybody else.
Well, I can't get the damn globes anymore. I've gone like multiple drafts where I literally do not see a globe at all. Like, it's just not even like, oh, I had to take it over blah blah blah, and I didn't. It's just there are no globes. Everybody wants to do this globe thing right now.
Yeah, I haven't enjoyed the format as much. Like, I don't think this is one that I don't just objectively despise it or anything, like something like Aether Drift, where I just was off it super hard. I just haven't been drafting much in general. I think I've drafted the format like 5 times, and it definitely feels, and the data, as far as I'm aware, backs this up, that it's definitely more rare driven than some of the previous sets, where like the rares have a 50% to a 100% higher chance of winning you the game than in some previous sets or something like that. They just have an outsized impact on the game, and I'm not really I haven't really been drafting enough to get into the Mardu decks just yet, and I don't think I don't hate it or anything, but I also haven't really been super compelled by the gameplay. I think the draft is really fun. The actual drafting phase of the format is super engaging. But I haven't found the gameplay to be quite as good. A lot of staring at me and my opponent, trading off resources, staring at each other, and then one of us resolves a bomb. Mostly the most common one that isn't rare is probably the 6/5 Hexproof Dragon. That card seems particularly egregious.
Yeah, Palladium Wars at uncommon. I did have a question for you, Teld, and I hope this doesn't come off as insulting or anything like that. I'm not meaning it in that way, but the question I've been meaning to ask you is do you enjoy drafting anymore? It seems like out of the last 2 years that we've been discussing things and playing formats and stuff that so limited formats basically almost never hit for you.
That's
Plooster error. I guess I would say Plooster error drafting is a different thing. But I know you're a fan of OTJ and Duskmourn, but it sounds like you just don't enjoy majority of formats that come out.
I also liked MKM. Yeah, I liked MKM, OTJ, and Duskmourn. So I actually liked most of the sets last year. I did not like Aether Drift, though I could not even tell you if that was a gameplay thing. I just found that set so aesthetically repulsive, I couldn't really bring myself to draft it. Yeah, I think I will admit, with this one in particular, I've just been busy with work and stuff and haven't really, I was real busy on my spring break as well, so I actually drafted less there than I thought. Yeah, I've just been on a bit of a downturn with Magic in general, not anything in particular or whatever. I just sometimes, Chris does the same thing where we'll go through phases where we'll be super, super into Magic, and sometimes it's a little more tertiary to what else is going on in your life. It's not something that's necessarily always at the forefront of our mind like some of the other people in the community maybe. So right now, Magic is just a game that I've not been, at least with the last couple of limited sets, haven't really enjoyed as much. So I don't know. I get where you're coming from, though. There's been a lot of there's been more misses than hits for me a lot in the last couple of years.
Oh, I was going to say, I can empathize with that. I've pulled away from the game and come back to it multiple times over the years. When I said I've been playing since 2007, there's definitely been lulls for me, and it happens, But yeah, the nice thing about this game is it can always pull you back.
I tend to be a little more forgiving of even the formats that I know most people like, with the exception of Foundations, which I thought was god-awful fucking terrible, and I don't know why all the streamers out there were like, Foundations was great, blah, 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 it was a great core set experience. No, the fuck it wasn't. It was terrible, and that's the first time in a long time that I've just been this set sucks objectively, and other people need to hate it too, because I hate it. But even things like Aether Drift, which I know the majority of people don't like I still sit down at night and still enjoy a draft of it. Aesthetically, I think it was awful, but I like gameplay in general, regardless of where things slot in necessarily. So I would say I am a little bit nervous about the latter half of this year, because I believe Spider-Man and Avatar: The Last Airbender are going to be so far up universes beyond but that I'm just not going to enjoy them because of how they aesthetically come off. So that's got me worried that I might actually hit a downtick on drafting. I will say for Tarkir Dragonstorm, I'm really high on it right now, and obviously when you do really well, you tend to be higher on formats coming in, and I've hit I've been on fire with this format with lucky top decks and opponents missing lands and stuff like that. So I've been winning at a higher clip than usual. I don't think it beats out Duskmourn for me. I don't think by the end of this format I will think it's better than Duskmourn. But I did realize there are kind of two camps of limited formats for me now. There are the ones like Tarkir Dragonstorm where everything's kind of baseline fairly simple. If you look at the mechanics, there's nothing groundbreaking to the mechanics, and you're just kind of trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work, so where the power lies and the fixin'. And that's one sphere of limited formats. And then you've got the Duskmourn sphere of limited formats, which we don't get as often, where the decks that you can draft in that format are things that you don't get in any other format, like blue-red rooms and the Eerie decks and stuff like that. And I think
yeah,
I think as far as the baseline limited formats where you're just trying to get maximum power level and synergy or whatever, I think Tarkir is easily one of the best limited formats I've played. but when it comes to like the novel experiences and stuff, I tend to like those more and latch onto those more and remember them better. So I think Duskmourn is in that sphere, and I think those kind of pull ahead for me. So as much as I love Tarkir and I love kind of like the rock paper scissors of control beats mid-range has game against aggro. Aggro beats control, which I really like right now. That's kind of where the meta has shifted. I do think Duskmourn is still like the peak for me, like actual peak for me.
Duskmourn, the more I think about it, might actually be creeping into just my favorite set of all time. I just keep wanting that. Every time that format's came back like twice, and I drafted it, 2 or 3 times the first time, and then I drafted it once or twice the next time. And I don't know, I drafted that format a bunch, and it just never really got old. It always felt like there was room to explore, and maybe I'm just getting to the point where I just want these relentlessly complicated sets that also, I think part of my problem with the last 2 sets actually, as far as gameplay goes, is they felt really slow and plotting to me. And I actually think that the golden age of limited thing about where limited was really fast and it was your job to figure out how to stop the aggro decks. I think I like that gameplay better than when the baseline is decks are slow and your job is to figure out how to beat those decks. I think I like Magic more when aggro is the thing that you have to answer, because that means I get to play more of the plotting, like the mid-range and control decks where I'm figuring out how to beat up on the aggro decks. Whereas I actually don't like it when me and my opponent are just sitting there each drawing a ton of cards until one of us draws our bomb. I think that's particularly kind of boring gameplay.
Sure. But as a caveat to that, you probably want to be in those aggro formats that actually have tools to beat aggro, because sometimes you get in those LCI formats where they're just like, screw it, like we're just gonna not put in anything to stop the aggro decks.
Right.
Yeah, I actually think LCI was the biggest problem was the bombs. Great.
Well, the bombs were 2 drops and
4 and 5 mana bombs, but but I actually think that format probably would have been fine, because I know this is a controversial opinion, but I actually think 1 is hella overhated. I think 1 is a totally serviceable format, and I drafted it like 10 times.
Persian, we just got an opening on the Jank Tank podcast. Would you like to?
Oh, okay. Yes.
You're not the only person who's voiced that opinion about 1, though. So.
Yeah, I'm not going to say 1 is good. It's no more than like a 4. It's a below average set. But I will say there's a lot of play patterns that I've enjoyed more than some of the other sets after it. But like my current favorite crop of sets are probably like Duskmourn, Midnight Hunt, and man, they really nailed those horror sets. Outside of
Midnight Hunt's a little controversial for me, but I do remember liking it even if there weren't that many decks you could draft. I liked the decks that you could draft. I liked playing them and playing against them. So, but yeah, I guess just to wrap up my thoughts, I really like Tarkir Dragonstorm. I've seen a meta shift in the first 2 weeks, which I always appreciate when there are meta shifts in Limited, from like, the 5-color decks are the best things to be doing, to just kidding, the aggro decks actually just curve stomp these glove decks. And then I think that is going to shift towards like, Abzan mid-range is actually good against these aggro decks. It brick walls them pretty hard. So I like limited formats that have meta shifts from week to week, which you do not see very often in data era.
Yeah, I mean, we saw some of it, and sometimes it feels like I felt like MKM experienced that, but then when you actually look at the data, it's like, no, Boros has just been the best deck the whole time. But I always felt like I felt like after like the second week of the format, I never drafted Boros the rest of the time.
MKM was less meta shifting and more just self-correcting draft, where once everybody was on red white, other decks actually got to. It's not that people started drafting different decks; it's that everybody started drafting the best deck, and they just cut each other hard.
Maybe, I don't know. I was on Topiary Panthers / everything for the entire format. That was, which I actually really enjoyed. I also, when I think about formats that I like, I tend to like when green decks are doing like silly put together multicolor things and not just playing like, here's my 3 mana 4/4 or whatever.
I just to close out, I was watching Persian play the other day, and there was in a position where he had a really good attack with one creature, and I was like, yeah, we just flunge here, don't we? And what I meant to say was like, we attack with the big flyer that can attack, and Persian, I said like, let's flunge, and Persian was just like, okay, attack all, and just like,
attack all.
Yeah, you said jam, let's jam.
Yeah, I said let's jam. It was a bad choice of words, but then you're like, yeah, I'll attack my 1/1 into this 3/3 or whatever, and I was like, no, wait, I didn't mean to say it like that. Hey, you're back for Commander Night. Good to see you again. Oh, yeah, glad to be back. Look, sorry about getting carried away with the brackets last time. It was just something really new for all of us, and I wanted to make sure you got it all down as a new player. No, it's okay. I think I figured out the whole bracket thing. Just excited to play with the new decks I've put together. Awesome. Glad to hear it. You read up on the new ban list, right? The what? The ban list changed? Yeah, actually, it shouldn't really affect you that much. It was mostly just a few unbannings. They updated the game changers list and everything, too. Oh, I didn't hear about this. What ended up changing? Well, they unbanned Sway of the Stars. No big deal there. It's kind of like Worldfire, right? It can invalidate some games, but for the most part, people won't be playing it. Yeah, never heard of that one. There's also Braid's Cabal Minion coming off the list. It's like a smokestack in the command zone, but it shouldn't be too much trouble in casual pods. Okay, I'll be on the lookout for that one, thanks. Yep, and then you've got Coalition Victory. It's a bit cheesy, but no worse than something like Approach of the Second Sun, and you can't play it in very many decks anyway. Yeah, expensive alternate win cons seem fine to me. And then Panoptic Mirror's another one that can pull off some combo wins with extra turn spells and things like that, but it's pretty expensive to pull off anyway. Right. Cool. Well, I don't think any of those changes affect my decks, so I'm excited. And then there's Gifts Ungiven. Whoa, what's Gifts Ungiven? Oh, what's Gifts Ungiven? Sit your ass down and listen up, little man. Hey, what? That's not very nice. Gifts Ungiven is a 4-mana instant that lets you tutor 4 cards from your library. Holy shit, 4 cards? 4 cards. Quadruple demonic tutor. Except there's a catch. Your opponent gives you 2 of those cards and the others go to the graveyard. Oh, okay. Well, that seems reasonable. Well, it's not, so shut up and pay attention. Hey, I don't really like being talked to that Gifts way. Ungiven creates the illusion of giving your opponent a choice, but experienced players know that the power of the card lies in engineering situations where you don't give your opponents any good options to pick from. Oh man, you're doing the thing again, aren't you? Does he always do this? Yeah, man, pretty common occurrence. Imagine this. Your opponent end steps a Gifts Ungiven and shows you 4 differently named board wipes. What cards are you going to give them? Well, it doesn't really matter because... Trick question. It doesn't really matter because they're going to get what they want no matter how you split the card. Yeah, I mean, that seems pretty good. Now comes the real chicanery. Your opponent can choose to just search up 2 cards and immediately bin them, setting up the perfect cards for a graveyard-based strategy. Wait, they don't have to get 4 cards? No, dumbass. They can fail to find the other cards and just entomb 2 cards as they see fit. Oh man, this card seems kind of nuts. Why would they unban it? It's a game changer. Everything should be fine. The players will surely self-regulate and keep Gifts Ungiven piles to the appropriate level of the brackets they're playing in. But what if they don't? Then all else has failed and the universe will slip into a ceaseless cycle of war and conflict. The nations will eliminate one another and leave this earth a barren shell of what it once was. Wait, what are you talking about? All shall kneel before the ever-watchful eyes of the holy ones, and all shall heed their cry, stare into oblivion and accept your fate. So yeah, just a few changes to the Game Changers list and ban list, nothing big. Yeah, I think I'm just going to go draft tonight instead.